Hello, my name is Callum O'Neill, and I am the founder of an experiential training and coaching organisation called TACT. Each one of us has a story to tell of how the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted upon us, our families, our friends, colleagues, our clients. The daily news bulletins broadcast the ever increasing numbers of global deaths. What isn't being counted yet is the mental and emotional strains, stresses, and anxieties it's causing to our mental health. As we sit in our lockdown bunkers once again, I really wanted to offer something, do something constructive, something that might just help someone, any of you out there, particularly when thinking about returning to work after lockdown or continuing at work during lockdown with COVID in mind. Almost 350 years ago, Sir Isaac Newton penned a letter which contained a now rather famous quote: "If I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants." So for this series of vodcasts, I have humbly and most gratefully climbed onto the shoulders of my Henley Business School alumni to ask them if they might share their experiences and expertise from the perspective of returning to work or continuing at work with COVID in mind. In this vodcast, I'm joined by Alex Porter. She is a Henley Business School certified coach, and her area of expertise is in working in prisons and supporting vulnerable women. When we met, Alex spoke with me about the need to understand the needs of returning employees and clients, the importance of self-care, and how each of us can work together to create a trauma-informed workplace. This is Alex Porter. Alex, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us and being willing to share with us your specialism, particularly as we're looking at COVID in mind, and particularly focusing on not only people having to return to the workforce, but in light of government talking about, if you can stay at home, do for the next 6 months, how that's going to impact people. So what is it that you've come to share with us today, and why is that important to you?
So I'm really excited to be able to share some knowledge and experience I have in trauma-informed practice. So trauma-informed practice is the concept that people may have things in their background which affect the way they show up today. So traditionally or historically, that's been very much driven by childhood experiences, and there are questionnaires that are given, and you can see that you have a certain number of experiences which mean that you would really benefit from a trauma-informed approach.
I imagine trauma is different for everyone. The trigger is different for everyone because it depends on how we process the event.
Absolutely. And there are certain common ways, though, that people will process trauma. So you'll find that people who do have a traumatic background may have a really hard time managing emotions and staying regulated. Now, the relevance today is that many of us might well be experiencing trauma because of the things that have happened recently, or you might well be looking after colleagues and employees who have had a really tough time under COVID. And having an awareness of how that might show up in the workplace can really enable you to support those colleagues and employees. And there are various techniques and things that you can hold in mind as you're working with your colleagues.
Hopefully you'll be able to share some of those techniques. I mean, I don't know how deeply we go into them, but perhaps you as we go on through the interview today, you can tell us perhaps how some of those techniques might work. Before we do, though, what I'd love to know is, what's your background? How did you get into this? What was that lightning conductor moment that made you decide that this is how or where you were going to go on your journey of working in this field?
The relevance for me is that I work as a support worker and coach for young women as they leave prison. And no young woman turns up in prison for a random event. It's going to be a combination of things that have happened to them. So as part of our training, we've learned an awful lot about trauma and how that will show up when you're working one-to-one. But the light bulb moment was when a colleague of mine said, it's a bit like healthy eating. You don't need to be ill to benefit from eating well.
It's a really good analogy.
It's a lovely analogy, isn't it? And the same goes with a trauma-informed approach. I think if you're in charge of performance for Formula One, you might well decide to shelve some trauma approaches. But other than that, there's nothing about having a trauma-informed approach in the workplace which won't benefit you and your colleagues and employees. So for me, that was the light bulb moment. The realization that this isn't just a set of tools that can be done to a cohort, but it's just a really empowering and healthy way of interacting with our peers and colleagues and employees.
So talk us through how would it work if you were working with a client, perhaps you could discuss the kind of precursor. The context that we're looking at within this environment is looking at with COVID in mind and the impact that that has had. And you said yourself that it's interesting because you might be coping with it perfectly well, but a colleague or a family member might not be, and that's going to have an impact as well. So as a precursor, where might it show up? And how then would you get involved and work with a client?
So one really fantastic way of taking this approach is just empathetically. So maybe you've been in the office throughout, maybe you've been in charge of ensuring that the office is COVID secure, but just imagine what it's like for your employee who comes in for the first time, or if you're arranging to meet a client on site. And try and envisage what it feels like to them. Is it going to look differently to them? Are they going to feel wrong-footed as they walk in and they see the 2-meter signs or the direction signs? What's that going to feel like to someone coming in and seeing it afresh? And once you can imagine what that's like for your client or co-worker, you can put in step things which will make it more comfortable for them. So, for example, that might be letting people know what the workplace is going to look like. And you can do that via emails. You could do that by recording a short video and putting it on the company website or your intraweb, so that as people return, they're not surprised. They feel safe. They feel emotionally safe because they know it's going to be different. They know they're going to be asked to wear a mask, or that they have to use a different entrance, or that when they go up to the office, half the people aren't there because they're working from home. So you're engendering trustworthiness. You're telling people what it's going to be like when they arrive in the office.
Giving people that certainty of this is what you will expect so that they can process that information before they encounter that information. So it's almost like as they are presented with the new environment, the new rules, they are rules that they knew were in existence rather than it becoming an overwhelming of the senses.
Yeah, exactly that, not overwhelming of the senses. And many of us might have been in the office throughout, so we're used to it. We're used to the new normal. You may well have colleagues who've been working from home throughout and are only now just starting to come back in. And that explaining why we've done this, explaining why you have to come in a different entrance is really helpful, particularly if it can be done in advance.
It's done from when you're saying explaining why, I'm guessing it must be really important to explain the positive reason for that. At the end of the day, you're looking to protect each other. It's like wearing the mask. I don't wear the mask to protect me. I wear the mask to protect you.
Exactly.
Yeah, I see.
it's also very helpful to bear in mind different issues and different things that people are going to be bringing with them. So again, back to this empathy and understanding that some of your staff not only will have experienced COVID differently, but have got things about them, which means they experience it differently. So for example, having a higher BMI, increased anxiety, BAME, our BAME colleagues might again feel more at risk. So being able to hold this in mind, maybe not make explicit, but be aware that we're all bringing different things into the workplace.
What are those magic bullets of being able to help those people move back into work and feel maybe not confident initially, but growing that confidence? So you said, be open and honest with them. Let them know what the new rules are. Describe for them what those new rules look like, and most importantly, why they're there and how it benefits all of us. What other fantastic nuggets could we put in there?
So I suppose the first thing to do is to be completely aware of what the current guidelines are. So there's absolutely no point designing a beautiful, trauma-informed, soft, supporting all five senses workplace if it's not COVID secure. So I'd always advise going to the most recent Public Health England guidelines and being aware of actually what are you meant to be doing. But once you've done that, being able to support colleagues by, again, that empathy, just by imagining what it's like for them coming back into the office, imagine how it's going to look to them, and explaining why you've done and why you're doing what you've done. And of course, not everyone's going to be back in the office. So I've noticed some lovely practice over the last few months with colleagues working from home, and something which was for me nothing to do with work, but calling up the bank. And before I even got through to speak to someone, there was an explanation that the person I was going to be talking to would be at home. So be prepared for animal and child noises. And I just thought that was a really lovely example of an employer who was thinking about what it was going to be like for the employee being at home and him being in this completely different environment, but also thinking about how the customer was, how he could prepare the customer for talking to the employee working from home. And I had to sit online for a few more minutes before I got through, but instead of feeling frustrated, I was thinking, I was picturing the call handler sitting at home with his puppies. And I just thought that was a really nice example of how the employer had held both the customer and the employee in mind.
It's interesting that as a coach, I have for several years now used technology in order to coach people on other side of the world, or just to avoid having to do a commute and do our bit for to reduce carbon emissions. But what's interesting is that one of the wonderful things that's coming out of this is, I know that historically I've had people get themselves into quite a traumatic state because they've got a child at home and they're having to talk to me, and they're so apologetic and so. But now what I'm seeing is, it's like, you know what, if you want to coach with me, have your child on your knee, bring your dog and pet them and pat them. And if your kids are asking where something is in the fridge and if they can go and play with Sally from across the road, that's all fine. And I really love that, people are learning that work life has never just been work life. There's no real separation. In so many ways, they do overlap as much as we don't want them to. And it's just nice that people can finally understand, and they stop wanting you to be this perfect specimen of what a business person should look like, or what a work colleague should look and sound like, and what their life should be like.
And maybe that is a silver lining. Maybe we can realize through the changes we're having to make because of COVID that there is a different way of working. So the whole concept of presenteeism and the assumption that people are going to be less productive if they're working from home has been really challenged. Again, realize, actually, do I need to have a strict dress code? if my peers, if my colleagues are sitting there in a nice, fresh, COVID secure environment, doesn't matter if they're wearing Uggs and scarves. So that idea that you can really look anew at the working environment and see, can we still be productive?
I genuinely think you're onto a great point there. I think when we think about the generation that's to come after us that are moving into those senior leadership positions, who will have the power to make decisions such as wear your Uggs, wear a snood, wear a big carpet around you if you want to, because the most important thing is that in this environment you feel comfortable and you feel safe. And so, yeah, that would be a lovely silver lining.
Yeah.
One question that I have in terms of trauma-informed practice, so in the advice that you're giving to any of our viewers that are listening to this, should they be careful of using the word trauma or traumatic?
I don't think that as employers, we need to let on that we know about trauma-informed practice. And I agree, it's quite a triggering phrase, isn't it? And I wonder if just thinking about empathy might be more useful.
Okay.
Because you're right,
we know
there's
what
certainly
it is,
a certain about trauma.
So in many ways, if I'm understanding it, it's about really, before you make any decisions or before you try and get your staff, your talent, your reports to conform to new business practices, it's really about fully understanding their current position and their perspective on the new position that you're introducing them to. Am I understanding that?
Yeah, and really challenging yourself. Do I need people to be physically present in the office? Do I need a dress code? Can I accommodate my employees by letting them come in late and eating at their desk, for example? So one of the things that we've done at work is we've really looked at the space and where people eat. We always had a no food at the desk rule, but actually we don't want to be cramming everyone into the kitchen. So we've let people eat at the desk. Everything is being cleaned at the end of the day. And actually that hasn't been a disaster. It felt like such a big thing to do, because traditionally there'd always been quibbles about smelly food and productivity. But in fact, everyone recognised that they couldn't all sit in the small kitchen. People brought in unsmelly food. And that was almost a sacred cow, that you left the office to go and eat. You can't do that because there's not space, and it's been fine.
It reminds me of, you mentioned sacred cows. There's a book called Sacred Cows Make the Best Burgers. Once you feel very much part of a culture, whether a certain behaviour is right or wrong, you end up reinforcing it and not necessarily questioning its efficacy for the team or the system, or in terms of being able to cope with the trauma that's inflicted on all of us because of this COVID-19 situation.
Absolutely. And it is something we're all in together.
I guess it's just having those explicit conversations and being inclusive with them. Don't make a decision until you've got everyone's perspective, I suppose. Yes,
which is interesting as well, because one of the really important things about a trauma-informed approach is sharing information and lines of communication. And so one of the things that I've seen advised is to let your employees know all the time what's happening, sort of via WhatsApp and emails and things. But there's definitely a sort of information overload. And if people are working from home and not having that cut-off point where they're not at work anymore, but then they're receiving a text to remind them to bring their mask or whatever, that isn't trauma-informed. That can be quite stressful. So that's definitely, if you have any sort of responsibility for the well-being of your employees and colleagues, that's definitely something to bear in mind, to what is information and what is information overload. And, you know, maybe you'll get it wrong sometimes. maybe we're not all going to be at our best at this time, but again, a trauma-informed approach is just holding on to that knowledge and giving each other a little bit of slack, treating each other with kindness.
What would be an effective way then, if I were in a position that I'm adopting trauma-informed practices, you've said, and just on that point that sometimes I'll get it wrong, what would you suggest would be an effective way for me to get feedback from people about what I'm doing right and what I'm not doing right without creating a traumatic experience?
Just very open questions like, how are you? How was this? You know, maybe not leaning in anxiously and saying, how are you coping in COVID? But
yeah, being mindful of that language. Yeah.
How are things? How was this? If you're meeting up with someone who you haven't seen for a while for a meeting, maybe saying, how was this? Rather than, are you coping with the mask and the empty train?
Yeah.
Signs on the floor.
Yeah. And as you say, it's a really interesting thing sometimes when you can ask a closed question, are you coping with? If you're in a senior position, quite often the person on the receiving end thinks, what answer do you want me to give you?
And they're going to want to reassure you that they are coping. Whereas, how are you? How was today? How has coming back been? Are better questions.
And I guess it's really important in that position to do that, to explicitly do that. Don't make assumptions. Check in regularly.
Yeah.
Check in on progress in terms of how they're progressing and perhaps how you, or if you're in an action group for the organization, how you as a group can progress as well. So it's not just kind of, you know, it's not just, well, that's what we've decided on how we're going to do it, and we'll just keep it doing that. I guess it's a moving feast. You have to adapt to those that you're working with and the constant change in circumstances. You know, it doesn't seem as though, if it's not every week, it's every day that the government's changing their plan.
Absolutely. And I think that holding in mind that this is a movable feast is really, really helpful. Things might change, things will change, people's experiences will change, people's journeys in and experience at work and working from home will change. So being able to be agile and respond to the needs of your colleagues and employees is fantastic. And that's definitely trauma-informed.
Is there some kind of like model behavior I could demonstrate, or is there a way that I should be or could be introducing this to my staff or my team that would really facilitate a positive experience for bringing my team back into the workplace?
Absolutely. And I think the most powerful thing that as an employer that you can do is to demonstrate and to show me. So if you're telling your staff that it's fine to work from home or take breaks or wear Uggs, then do the same. So there's no point telling people that it's, it doesn't matter, or that we're very happy for you to work from home if you are always in the office yourself. And that's also something to bear in mind when you're just ensuring that it's not overcrowded. So as managers, you should be working from home sometimes just to demonstrate that it is acceptable.
That's a really great point, because we do, as part of creating that culture in the workplace, is we're constantly observing each other and what are they doing, what's the majority doing, and then we react accordingly. And it's such a powerful way, isn't it, that just demonstrate. If you're saying it's okay to be in this way, behave in this way, bring this behavior into our culture in the workplace so that we can have positive mental health in the workplace, then show it. Just don't only talk the talk, walk the walk, demonstrate it. Alex, where does trauma-informed practice originate?
So it originates from a realization and acknowledgement that our past experiences, we carry them with us. And one of the most common tools used to scale someone's need for a trauma-informed approach is called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Questionnaire. It's quite meaty. I wouldn't recommend that you flick through it before bedtime.
So it's not like the BuzzFeed questionnaire on Facebook then, no.
But what's interesting about a trauma-informed practice is that although it was developed for children who'd had traumatic experiences as they went into adulthood, it really is like healthy eating, and you don't have to be ill to benefit from a great diet. And that's what trauma-informed practice is, a great diet.
One question I was thinking of, if any of our audience today want to dive a little bit deeper into trauma-informed practice, is there a direction that you can point them toward? Can they connect with you on LinkedIn? I'm not saying, I appreciate you've got a job to do and you don't want to become consigliere for all our listeners and audience out there.
I'd be delighted to hear from anyone on LinkedIn, and I am there as Alex Porter. Interestingly, and maybe you'll be able to insert this, Cal, my LinkedIn picture is of the wellbeing room before we repainted it. I thought it was a lovely, cheerful orange. My colleagues said it wasn't.
They thought so otherwise, did they?
We have a wellbeing room at work, which we've repainted, and we've really borne in mind the 5 senses. So it is quiet. There's a speaker in there that you can play running water from. It's spacious. It's private, although not bookable. So we've really thought about how we can have a breakout room for everyone. So yes, if you're looking for Alex Porter on LinkedIn, it'll be in the non-wellbeing orange room.
So if I can sign off by just offering you the final word on this, Alex, is there anything else that you want to share with our viewers and our listeners today, either about trauma-informed practice, about yourself, or about your job?
I've just really enjoyed having the opportunity to talk a little bit about having a trauma-informed practice in the workplace. And just thinking about it really crystallized for me that this is such a fantastic approach, and it's a really useful way of working with people. So thank you so much for the opportunity, Cal.
Oh, no, absolutely my pleasure, because I've learned so much in this brief time that we've had. I've learned so much, and it's really in the moment, I'm already reflecting on having that consciousness to think about, don't make assumptions. Yeah. Ask how somebody's getting on, use those open questions. And it's not just how are you, fine, it's no, how are you? And listening to understand rather than listening just to get an answer for whatever that is. So I really appreciate your time and your insights today, Alex. Thank you so much for today. And I really look forward to our viewers and our listeners getting in touch with you and asking more questions. And maybe if this all proves to be a success, we can get you back again and you can share some of your stories about how your practice has had a positive influence on people who are experiencing trauma through what is quite a serious and tough time for many. Alex Porter, thank you very much.
I'd love to. Thank you very much, Cal. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.